The old wooden doors of St. Alden's Church trembled gently as the wind from the Atlantic brushed against them. Morning light streamed through the stained glass windows, casting soft colors across the polished floor. Guests stood up one by one, turning toward the entrance where Olivia Harper, in a simple ivory dress, began her slow walk down the aisle. The church was filled with quiet beauty, the kind that settled deep in a person's heart. For a moment, everything looked peaceful. Everything looked right, until it was not. Without warning, a heavy thud echoed from the back of the church. Another thud followed, sharper this time, making several guests turn around. Before anyone could react, the doors burst open, slamming hard against the stone walls. A streak of gray first shot through the entrance. It was Jasper, Olivia's 12-year-old Australian shepherd, barreling into the sacred silence of ceremony with a force born from pure desperation. His paws skidded across the wooden floor as he sprinted straight toward the bride. People gasped. Some stepped back. A few called out in confusion. But Jasper never slowed. His eyes were locked on Olivia, wide and burning with urgency, and the sound he made was not an ordinary bark. It was a warning, raw and unfiltered, echoing through the ancient church like a cry for help. Olivia froze. Her bouquet trembled in her hand as Jasper reached her, pressing his body against her legs, pushing her back, shielding her as if from an unseen threat. Before anyone could understand what was happening, Jasper swung his head toward Daniel, the groom, standing near the altar. The dog's low growl rumbled through the room, so deep and primal that even the air seemed to hold its breath. Then came the moment that changed everything. Jasper lunged forward and snagged the edge of Daniel's vest. The sound of tearing fabric sliced through the stunned silence. Something small and metallic slipped from the pocket and clattered onto the stone floor. The sharp echo of metal hitting stone felt louder than any shout. Guests turned their heads. Eyes widened. Daniel took a step back, face draining of color. And right then, standing near the aisle, I saw it all. My name is Thomas Miller. I serve as sheriff of this town for 4 decades. I have witnessed storms, tragedies, and miracles in equal measure. But on that day, inside that old church, I witnessed something I could not ignore. I watched a loyal dog break every rule of obedience to protect the woman he loved like family. I watched truth spill onto the ground in the form of a tiny misplaced object, and I knew, with a certainty that only age and experience can give, that Jasper had not come here to ruin a wedding. He had come to save a life. What none of us knew yet was just how close Olivia Harper had come to stepping into a future built on deception, and how a worn-out, gray-muzzled dog sensed a danger long before any human could see it. That was the morning everything changed in our quiet town. And this is the story of how Jasper tried to warn us. There are people who pass through a town without leaving much behind, and then there are those whose quiet presence becomes part of the landscape itself. Olivia Harper belonged to the latter. Even before the wedding morning that shook our little community, Olivia was someone everyone in the region knew, or at least felt they knew, not because she spoke loudly or drew attention, but because she carried a kind of gentle strength that you notice only when life becomes heavy and you find you need someone like her to remind you that resilience still exists. She had lived in our coastal town her entire adult life, a place where the ocean winds carve lines on the faces of fishermen, and the long winters teach you to appreciate every warm day you get. Olivia was the kind of person who greeted neighbors with a smile, brought warm bread to the senior home during holidays, and spent her summers tending a small vegetable garden behind the wooden cottage she inherited from her grandmother. If you asked around, nearly everyone had a memory of her kindness. But behind that kindness was a story most people knew only in fragments. 8 years before the wedding incident, Olivia had lost her husband in a tragic highway accident. It happened on a winter night when the roads were slick and visibility was poor. She was only in her mid-30s then, far too young to become a widow and far too gentle to carry that kind of pain alone. I remember seeing her walk along the shoreline in the early mornings afterward, wrapped in her wool coat, staring at the waves as though they held answers she could not yet name. Some people heal by talking. Others heal by working. Olivia healed by enduring, by waking up each day and placing one foot in front of the other, even when her heart felt frozen. She had been a schoolteacher at the local elementary school. Her students adored her. They said she made every story feel alive and every lesson feel like an adventure. But grief has a way of dimming even the brightest souls. After her husband's passing, Olivia stepped away from teaching. She said she needed time, and time, slow and heavy as the tides of Maine, eventually brought her a companion who would change everything. His name was Jasper. I still remember the day she found him. A storm had torn through the coastline the night before, and most of us were busy helping clear fallen branches and debris. Olivia, always one to help, joined the effort. That was when she heard faint whining coming from a patch of overturned driftwood. Underneath, trembling and soaked, was a half-grown Australian shepherd with a wounded leg and eyes so full of fear that even the toughest of us would have softened. Olivia lifted him gently, wrapped him in her scarf, and carried him home through the cold. The vet later told us the dog had been abandoned, left behind, forgotten, but Olivia did not let him stay in that state for long. She tended to his injuries, spoke to him softly, and sat beside him through long, quiet nights until he learned, little by little, that the world was still a safe place. The bond between them formed not in grand gestures, but in the shared silence of two beings who had lost something they loved. It was a connection built steadily over years. Jasper followed Olivia everywhere, to the grocery store, to the cliffs overlooking the harbor, to the local farmer's market every Saturday. Where she walked, he walked. Where she rested, he rested. And in the long winters of Maine, when the wind howled against the wooden boards of her small house, Jasper would curl at her feet as though guarding her from memories that sometimes tried to return. People in town began to say that the two healed each other. I believe that was true. I saw it myself more than once. When Olivia smiled again, truly smiled, it was always with Jasper at her side. She had regained the softness of hope, something I was not sure she would ever reclaim after her loss. So when the news spread that Olivia had fallen in love again, many of us felt a quiet relief. We wanted her to find happiness. We wanted her life to feel whole again. And yet, the way Jasper reacted to the new man in her life, well, that was something none of us could ignore. Least of all me, because I had seen what dogs react to. I had seen their instincts reveal truths long before any human could understand them. And Jasper, that loyal old dog, was beginning to sense something long before the rest of us did. And that brings me back to the morning when Olivia first met the creature who would become her greatest protector. If her life had been a long, cold shoreline carved by loss, then Jasper arrived like a small ray of light that refused to be extinguished. Their story did not begin with joy. It began with a storm. It was the kind of storm our Maine coast is known for, fierce enough to shake windows and scatter entire sections of driftwood along the shore. When dawn finally broke, the sky still hung heavy with gray clouds, and the ocean looked restless, its waves rolling like they had something more to say. Most of us were out clearing fallen branches, checking on neighbors, and repairing small damages to homes. Olivia, being who she was, joined us without hesitation. She told me later that she had almost stayed home that morning, tired from another night of scattered sleep. But something made her go outside. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was a need to keep moving through the grief that still clung to her. Whatever it was, that simple decision changed everything. She heard it before she saw him, a faint whimper, barely louder than the wind. She followed the sound to a pile of broken branches and sea toss that had washed up near the dunes. There, half buried under splintered planks, was a small Australian shepherd, drenched to the bone and trembling. His fur was matted with sand and salt. One of his back legs was bent at an unnatural angle. But what caught Olivia most was his eyes. Even after decades working with search dogs and service dogs, I have rarely seen eyes like that. Eyes that held fear, yes, but also a deep, aching confusion, as though he could not understand why he had been left behind. Olivia did not hesitate. She knelt beside him, whispering softly as though he could understand every word. The dog flinched at first, expecting harm. Then slowly, painfully slowly, he relaxed under her touch. She wrapped him in her scarf and carried him home as the morning wind bit at her face. I remember seeing her walk past the station that day, clutching the injured dog to her chest, her step steady and full of purpose. The veterinarian later confirmed what we feared. Jasper had not been swept away by the storm. He had been abandoned days earlier, left without food or protection. The storm simply brought him into our path. His injuries were treatable, but his trust in people had been shattered. The vet warned Olivia that healing his body would be the easy part. Healing his spirit would take far longer. But Olivia had known heartache too well not to recognize it in someone else. She prepared a warm corner for him near her fireplace, fed him broth during the nights when he refused to eat, and sat beside him until he finally closed his eyes in real sleep instead of exhausted collapse. Jasper's recovery was slow. Some days he would not move from his blanket except to drink water. Other days he would take 2 hesitant steps toward her, as though testing whether she would still be there. Weeks turned into months, and gradually, the abandoned dog who once shook at every sound began to follow Olivia through the house, first from room to room, then into the garden, then along the path to the cliffs when she went to watch the sunset. It was not long before the entire town came to know them as a pair. Where one went, the other followed. It was a companionship not born from convenience, but from the understanding that both had survived something they were never meant to face alone. In time, Jasper became part of our community too. The shopkeepers at the harbor recognized him. Children waved at him. Even the older folks, who had seen more than their share of pain, would smile when he trotted past with his gentle, steady gait. To everyone in town, he was no longer the abandoned dog. He was Olivia's guardian, her shadow, her steadfast companion. And to me, with all my years of watching dogs reveal truths long before humans noticed them, Jasper was more than loyal. He was perceptive in a way that made you pause and pay attention. Some dogs have instincts that go beyond training or experience. Jasper was one of them, which is why, when he started acting strangely around the man who would soon stand beside Olivia at the altar, I paid attention. He had never misread a person before, and what he sensed this time was something none of us were prepared to face. And that is where their real story began. Once Jasper finally allowed himself to trust again, something in him awakened. It was as if the storm that nearly ended his life had carried him straight into the arms of the one person who understood what it meant to lose everything and still keep going. The connection between Olivia and Jasper did not form quickly or loudly. It grew the way a gentle tide shapes the shoreline, subtle at first, then unmistakable. I watched that bond from a distance over the years, and I can tell you truthfully, I had rarely seen anything like it. In my time as sheriff, I worked with many canine partners. I learned how deeply dogs could sense the things we miss. But even with all that experience, the relationship between those two stood out. There was something almost unspoken between them. When Olivia stepped out of her cottage in the morning, Jasper would rise with quiet certainty, ready to follow. If she lingered too long at the cliffs overlooking the sea, he would sit beside her, his body leaning just enough against her leg to let her know he was there. During the long winters when icy wind rattled the windows, he lay curled at her feet, lifting his head whenever she stirred, as though listening to the rhythm of her breathing. It was not simply companionship. It was a shared healing. People in town noticed it too. The elder women at the market would watch Olivia and Jasper pass by and whisper that he seemed to read her mind. Children loved to stroke his graying fur, and Jasper, gentle as he was, always lowered his head so they could reach. Even the fishermen at the harbor joked that Jasper had better instincts about the weather than any forecast on television. What struck me most was how Jasper responded to Olivia's emotions. If she was anxious, he paced. If she was sad, he rested his chin on her knee. If she laughed, he wagged his tail with a kind of tender pride, like he felt responsible for her joy. Dogs can mirror our feelings, but this was more than that. This was a dog who had learned what it meant to be abandoned, and who would never let someone he loved feel alone again. There were evenings when I walked past Olivia's cottage and saw the two of them sitting outside, wrapped in the orange glow of a Maine sunset. Olivia would be reading or tending to her small garden, and Jasper would be nearby, listening to the world with a thoughtful stillness that only aging dogs possess. I often paused to take in the scene, because it reminded me that healing sometimes looks like two souls simply choosing to stay alive together. One winter night, When the wind howled like a distant siren and snow piled knee-high outside the station, I received a call from one of our deputies. He said Olivia's porch light had gone out, and a neighbor grew concerned. When I arrived, I found Jasper guarding the front door, shivering but steadfast, refusing to leave his place even for warmth. Inside, Olivia was resting on the couch, wrapped in blankets and recovering from a bad flu. She later told me Jasper never left her side, not even for a second. That was when I fully understood how loyal he was, and how fiercely he saw it as his duty to protect her. In a small town like ours, word travels fast. People began to say that Olivia had saved Jasper's life, but Jasper had saved her spirit. And perhaps that was true. They brought each other back from places that no one else could reach. But as steady and loving as their bond was, I began to notice something change when Daniel entered the picture. Jasper's demeanor shifted in ways I had never seen before. His watchfulness grew sharper, his protectiveness deepened, and his instincts, which had never been wrong in all the years I knew him, started pointing towards something none of us yet understood. What lay ahead was a test of that remarkable bond, a test that would unfold at the very heart of Olivia's new future, a test that Jasper sensed long before any human could read the signs. And it was right in the middle of that peaceful rhythm between Olivia and Jasper that Daniel Reed stepped into their lives, like a quiet breeze slipping through a window left slightly open. At first glance, nothing about him seemed out of place. In a small town like ours, where faces become familiar and patterns rarely shift, a newcomer always draws attention. But Daniel carried himself with the kind of polished manners that made people trust him before they truly knew him. He arrived in early September, when the leaves were just beginning to turn gold and the market stalls downtown smelled of apples and warm cider. I remember seeing him for the first time at the Fall Harvest Festival, standing near the booth where local artisans displayed their crafts. He was well-dressed, clean-cut, with the calm confidence of someone accustomed to being listened to. He struck up conversations easily, asking about the town's history, the lighthouse, the best place to get a bowl of clam chowder. Folks warmed to him quickly. After all, polite men with steady voices are rare enough these days. Olivia met him near the end of that afternoon. She had been helping arrange a table of handmade quilts for the community raffle when Daniel approached, complimenting the craftsmanship and asking if she was the artist behind them. Olivia laughed softly, as she always did when praised, her modesty shining through, and she told him her grandmother had created most of the patterns. I watched the exchange from a distance, and I could tell Daniel listened with real interest, or at least he made it look that way. They talked for a while, long enough for a few of us to notice how Daniel's eyes followed her with a kind of practiced attentiveness. He volunteered to help carry the remaining quilts back to her car when the festival ended. Olivia, being generous and trusting, accepted. Many people who lose loved ones carry a softness in their voice that invites kindness, and Daniel seemed drawn to it. But what struck me most that day was not Daniel himself. It was Jasper. The moment Daniel stepped toward Olivia, Jasper froze. His ears lifted, his body stiffened, and his tail lowered in a way I had seen only with police dogs who sense uncertainty. He did not bark. He did not lunge. He simply watched Daniel with an alertness that did not match the friendliness of the scene unfolding before us. When Olivia reached down to reassure him, Jasper pressed closer to her leg, refusing to take his eyes off the newcomer. It was subtle, so subtle that anyone who did not understand dogs might have dismissed it. But to someone like me, who had spent decades reading the silent signals of canine behavior, Jasper's unease was unmistakable. Dogs do not hide their instincts. They reveal them plainly, but only to the ones who know how to listen. Still, Olivia saw none of this. She saw kindness in Daniel. She saw someone who asked about her garden, someone who admired her volunteer work, someone who seemed genuinely interested in her life. And after years of loneliness, I could hardly blame her for letting a little warmth back into her heart. In the weeks that followed, Daniel became a regular presence. He visited Olivia's cottage often, sometimes bringing wildflowers he claimed to have picked along the trails, sometimes offering to help prepare small things around her home. To most people, he appeared reliable and considerate, the kind of man who remembered small details and made others feel heard. Yet Jasper continued to react the same way every time Daniel came near. He paced more. He lingered in doorways. He placed himself between Olivia and Daniel during every visit, standing close enough that Daniel occasionally laughed and said he felt like he was being evaluated by a furry security guard. But beneath that laugh, I sensed irritation. And beneath Jasper's steady stance, I sensed worry. It was a tension so quiet that it slipped past almost everyone. Almost. Because I had learned over the years that discomfort in a dog, especially a dog as perceptive as Jasper, is rarely without reason. And each time I saw Daniel's smile settle just a little too quickly into place, or caught the flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, I remembered Jasper's reaction. The dog was seeing something we had not yet seen. And as the days moved closer toward the wedding, Jasper's instincts grew sharper, more urgent, as if he understood the truth long before any of us were prepared to face it. Looking back now, the signs were there long before the wedding day arrived. They did not come all at once or in a loud, unmistakable way. Instead, they appeared slowly, like shadows stretching across a field as the sun begins to set. Subtle enough to overlook, clear enough for a dog like Jasper to sense. And as Daniel became a more permanent figure in Olivia's life, those shadows began to lengthen. At first, it was Jasper's hesitation. Each time Daniel visited the cottage, Jasper would stand near the doorway, refusing to greet him, refusing to step aside. It was unusual behavior for a dog who had become gentle and trusting with the entire town. Olivia tried to laugh it off, telling me Jasper was just being protective. But the way Jasper's ears pinned back and the low rumble in his chest said something deeper. It was not simple territorial instinct. It was worry. As the weeks passed, Jasper's reactions changed from mild discomfort to restless agitation. He began pacing the house on evenings when Daniel stayed late. He would lie at the foot of Olivia's bed, but his sleep was shallow. I know the sound of a dog dreaming, and the sound of a dog keeping watch. Jasper was not dreaming. He was listening. I remember one particular evening when I was walking past Olivia's cottage after dusk. The lantern on her porch glowed softly against the dark, and I could see Daniel's silhouette through the window. He appeared to be showing Olivia something on his phone, leaning in a little too close, speaking with an intensity that felt out of place. Meanwhile, Jasper stood several feet away, completely still, his gaze fixed on Daniel with unwavering concentration. The kind of focus I had seen in service dogs when they sense a person in distress. Another time, when the three of them walked into town together, people noticed Jasper positioning himself between Olivia and Daniel. It looked almost comical to anyone who did not understand behavior, like an overprotected companion unwilling to share attention. But I had seen dogs act like that only when they sense a change in a person's energy. A shift so subtle humans dismissed it, but dogs recognized it for what it was. Then there were the nights when Jasper refused to eat. Olivia grew worried and called the vet, who found nothing physically wrong with him. To most, it might have seemed like stress or age catching up to him, but something in my gut told me it was neither. Dogs often lose their appetite when their environment feels wrong, when their instincts pull them in too many directions at once. But the moment that truly stayed with me happened just 3 days before the wedding. A storm was gathering off the coast, the kind that makes the air feel heavy and electric. I had stopped by Olivia's cottage to drop off a bag of supplies for the upcoming community fundraiser. When Olivia stepped outside to greet me, I saw Jasper standing rigidly in the hallway behind her, staring at something deeper in the house. Daniel had arrived earlier than expected and was waiting in the kitchen. The moment his voice drifted toward the doorway, Jasper's body tensed. Not a single sound came from him, yet the message was as clear as day. I had seen that stance on police dogs when they sensed tension in a suspect. It was not aggression. It was awareness, hyper-awareness. Olivia, still caught up in the whirlwind of wedding preparations, brushed off Jasper's behavior as simple anxiety. She told me he was feeling left out lately, but the truth lived in Jasper's eyes, and dogs do not hide what they know. They only hope someone will listen. And then came the night before the wedding, when the winds howled through the pines and the ocean slammed against the rocks below the cliffs. Jasper whined at Olivia's bedroom door until she let him in. He lay beside her bed with his head raised, alert to every sound. When she finally fell asleep, he remained upright, That was when I knew it was more than instinct or jealousy. Jasper was bracing for something. Something he sensed long before any of us could see it. And as the hours counted down to the ceremony, the feeling in the air grew heavier. Jasper's unease deepened, and the truth he was trying to warn us about was drawing closer with every passing moment. And as those uneasy days drew closer to the wedding, I found myself thinking more and more about Jasper's quiet warnings, the way he watched every movement, the way he guarded Olivia's steps, the way his instincts sharpened with certainty only a dog could possess. Anyone who has ever loved a loyal companion knows that animals feel the world differently. They sense shifts in the air long before we notice them. They see truths in our eyes, clouded by hope or fear, often overlook. It was during those moments, watching Jasper try so desperately to communicate what he could not put into words, that I was reminded of something important. In my years working with canine units, I learned that a dog's loyalty is one of the purest forms of devotion we ever encounter. They warn us not to frighten us, but to protect us. They stay by our side not because they must, but because their hearts are bound to ours in ways we will never fully understand. And for those of you listening, especially those who have walked through life long enough to know how rare true loyalty is, I want to say this. If you have ever believed that animals carry a wisdom of their own, if you have ever felt that a dog sensed your sadness before you spoke it, or guarded you without being asked, then you understand the heart of this story. Jasper was not simply reacting. He was reaching out, trying to shield Olivia from a truth she had not yet seen. So before we move into the events that would change everything, allow me to extend a warm invitation. If you feel connected to stories where instinct triumphs over illusion, where loyalty guides us through the darkest moments, I invite you to stay with us. And if you believe, as I do, that the quiet actions of a devoted dog can reveal more than any spoken warning, then consider following this journey further. Because in this story, Jasper's instincts were not just a whisper. They were a lifeline. And what comes next will show just how powerful a dog's devotion can be when fate begins to tighten around the people they love. And so, after weeks of quiet warnings, silent tension, and a growing unease that only Jasper seemed able to understand, the morning of the wedding finally arrived. In a small Maine town like ours, wedding days carry a certain weight. There are moments when neighbors come together, when the church bells ring softly over the harbor, and when even the sea breeze seems to settle out of respect for promises about to be made. But that morning felt different. There was a heaviness in the air, a stillness that did not quite belong. I woke early and stepped outside to find the sky painted in muted shades of pearl and silver. A faint fog clung to the tops of the evergreens, drifting slowly through the pines like a whisper moving from one branch to another. The town was quiet, the kind of quiet that happens before a storm or before something important breaks the surface. And as I stood there breathing in the cold morning air, I sensed the same unease that I had seen in Jasper's eyes the day before. Olivia's cottage sat near the edge of town, a humble wooden home tucked between tall spruce trees. When I arrived to check in on her, the house looked peaceful from the outside, but inside, the atmosphere was far from calm. Olivia was moving from room to room, organizing last-minute details, smoothing the folds of her wedding dress, and trying her best to hold herself steady. She carried the nervous excitement any bride might feel, but beneath it was something else, something like a quiet tremor in her voice, a hesitation in her step. Sometimes, when people want so badly for life to be simple again, they teach themselves not to look too closely at the cracks. And then there was Jasper. He stood near the back door, watching every movement with a kind of desperate intensity. His fur was slightly ruffled, his tail low, his breath quick and uneven. When Olivia passed by him, he nudged her hand anxiously, as though urging her to stop, to rethink, to wait. She knelt beside him, cupped his face in both hands, and whispered, "It is going to be all right." But Jasper did not relax. He pressed his forehead gently into her knee, refusing to look away from her even for a second. I had seen that look before. I had seen it on service dogs when their handlers edged toward danger. I had seen it on search dogs just moments before we uncovered something the rest of us were not prepared to face. It is a look that comes from instinct, not fear. A dog can sense a ripple beneath the surface long before we even realize the water has changed. As the hour approached, A small group gathered outside Olivia's cottage. Friends, neighbors, and family members arrived one by one, offering congratulations and warm embraces. But even in that cheerful crowd, Jasper's unease did not waver. When the bridal car pulled up to take Olivia to the church, Jasper positioned himself in front of the path leading to the door. He was not aggressive. He was pleading, his eyes wide and uncertain. Olivia had to coax him aside gently, running her hand along his back with a trembling affection. She stepped into the car. Jasper pawed at the door, whining softly as it closed. His entire body pressed forward, as though trying to push himself inside. It was a sound that settled deep in my chest, a sound that carried the weight of everything he'd been trying to warn her about. As the car pulled away, I watched Jasper stand in the driveway, his head lowered, his ears pinned back, his breathing shallow. It looked like heartbreak. And if a dog can pray, then in that moment, Jasper was praying with every part of his being. I stepped toward him and said quietly, "You see something we do not, old friend." He turned his head toward me, and in his eyes I saw fear, urgency, and a fierce determination that made the hair on my arms rise. I knew then that Jasper would not let the day unfold without trying again. And I was right, because the morning that began with fog and uneasy stillness was about to become a day no one in our town would ever forget. Jasper had already warned us. Soon he would act. As the bridal car disappeared down the winding road that led toward St. Alden's Church, a hush fell over Olivia's cottage. Guests began to follow in their own vehicles, leaving behind a swirl of excitement and cheerful chatter. But Jasper did not move. He remained rooted in place, staring at the empty road, as if he could still see the car carrying Olivia away. The despair in his eyes was unmistakable, and it cut through the morning air like a blade. It was Daniel's brother, Mark, who finally attempted to coax Jasper back inside the gate. He spoke softly, tugging gently at the leash Olivia had secured around Jasper's collar earlier that morning. Jasper resisted, planting his paws firmly into ground, muscles tense. I could see the conflict pulsing through him. He wanted to run after Olivia, but he had always honored her word. Obedience had been his promise to her. But instinct was something older, deeper, something he could no longer suppress. Mark tightened his hold on the leash. "Come on, boy," he murmured with an uneasy smile. "She will be back soon." But Jasper was not listening. His ears twitched. His breathing grew sharper. He lifted his head and sniffed the air as though searching for a trace of Olivia. Then he looked at me, and in that gaze, I saw something that sent a tremor down my spine. Determination, desperation, a decision forming in the silence between two heartbeats. I had seen dogs fight through injury and exhaustion to reach the ones they loved. But I had never seen a dog fight through obedience itself, with one swift movement, so fast that even I, with decades of experience, barely saw it happen. Jasper twisted his body just enough to loosen the tension on the leash. He stepped backward, dropped his shoulder, and slipped the collar over his head in a single fluid motion. It was a kind of maneuver police dogs sometimes use in emergencies, when instinct overtook training. Jasper had not been trained for that. He learned it from survival. The leash snapped free, the collar falling onto dirt with faint rustle. Mark gasped. I shouted his name out of reflex. But Jasper was already moving. He bolted out of the yard with a speed that belied his age, sprinting across the gravel path, claws scraping against stone as he turned sharply toward the direction Olivia had gone. The world seemed to hold its breath as he bounded past the spruce trees and into the open stretch leading to the church. For a brief second, all I could hear was the rhythm of his paws and the distant rumble of waves crashing against the cliffs. There was something almost sacred in his run, as if every step carried a message his heart was desperate to deliver, a message he knew he had no choice but to bring himself. I broke into a jog, calling after him, but Jasper did not stop. He ran with the kind of urgency only animals possess, the kind born from pure instinct, the kind that rises when danger approaches someone they love. His entire body leaned into the wind, driven by a force stronger than fear, stronger than hesitation. It was devotion in its purest form. Cars heading to the wedding slowed as Jasper streaked past them. Some drivers rolled down their windows in surprise. Others honked gently, trying to steer him off the road. But Jasper stayed focused, cutting through the morning fog like a single beam of purpose. What none of them understood, what I barely understood myself, was that Jasper was not running away. He was running toward the truth. And by the time any of us caught up, that truth would already be taking shape inside the old church where Olivia waited, unaware of the danger that rested not in fate, but in the heart of the man she was about to marry. Jasper's escape was not just a moment of panic. It was the beginning of something larger, something none of us would fully understand until much later. By the time he vanished down the path, his gray fur blending into the silver haze of the Maine morning, my instincts were already telling me that whatever drove him forward was powerful enough to shatter every boundary he had ever learned. And as I hurried to catch up, I could feel the tension in the air deepen with every step. The road to St. Alden's Church curved gently through a long stretch of pine forest, the kind that muffled sound and made the world feel narrower than it truly was. That morning, the fog hung low across the asphalt, rolling between the trees like soft smoke. The bridal car, a simple white sedan Olivia had rented for the day, moved slowly through that mist. The driver, unaware of anything unusual, hummed along with the radio while Olivia sat in the back seat, holding her bouquet in trembling hands, trying to steady her breathing. She never saw Jasper until the very last second. What the driver first noticed was a shape, a blur, then a flash of gray for cutting across the fog like a streak of living urgency. He slammed the brakes, tires screeching against a damp road. The car jolted forward violently, and Olivia's bouquet fell from her lap. Before either of them could gather their senses, Jasper leaped directly in front of the hood, paws spread wide, body trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. He was not barking. He was standing still, a statue carved out of instinct and love. The driver rolled down the window, leaning out with confusion etched across his face. "Is that our dog?" he muttered. Olivia pressed her hand against the glass, her breath catching in her throat. "Jasper," she whispered. Her voice cracked. She had never seen him behave like this. Never seen him block her path with such certainty, such unwavering resolve. He took one small step toward the door, then another, as if begging her to understand something he could not say. The driver stepped out of the car, cautiously. Fog swirled around his ankles as he approached Jasper. "Come on, boy," he said gently. "You cannot be in the road. She needs to get to the church." But Jasper did not move. He glanced at the driver only long enough to acknowledge him, then fixed his gaze back on Olivia with an intensity that pierced the morning silence. He lowered his head, ears back, tail still, and pressed his front paws against the door of the car. It was a plea, a warning, a desperate attempt to hold back the future that waited at the church. Inside the car, Olivia felt her chest tighten. She opened the door slowly, stepping out with careful movements, her dress brushing lightly against the wet ground. Jasper rushed to her side immediately, circling her once, then standing firmly in front of her, as if trying to steer her away from the road entirely. "Jasper, what is wrong?" she whispered, her fingers brushing the top of his head. His fur was warm beneath her palm, but his shaking told her everything. This was not excitement. It was fear. I reached the scene moments later, breathless from the run, and what I saw struck me harder than I expected. In all my years handling dogs and training them to read danger, I had never witnessed a moment so raw. Jasper was not merely reacting to nerves or confusion. He was confronting the road itself, standing between Olivia and what he believed waited ahead. His eyes, dark and clouded with desperation, met mine for a brief second. He was asking for help. A car full of wedding guests rolled to a stop behind us. A few people stepped out, murmuring in surprise, some laughing softly as if the moment were an adorable inconvenience. But it was not adorable. It was a warning delivered by a creature who had no words but had everything else. One guest said, "He must be anxious because she is getting married." Another added, "Dogs get emotional too." But I knew better. Dogs do not throw themselves in front of moving vehicles because of simple emotion. They do it when something inside them signals danger, the kind that humans have forgotten how to sense. Jasper pawed at Olivia's dress again, nudging her away from the church road. Then he looked toward the distant silhouette of the chapel barely visible through the mist. A low, uneasy sound rose from his throat. It was soft but carried the weight of truth. Olivia knelt, kissed the top of his head, and whispered, "I will be fine." Her voice was steady, but her eyes shimmered with doubt. She gently guided him aside, and after a long moment, one filled with tension so thick I could almost hear it, Jasper stepped back, not because he believed her, but because he knew the fight was not over. The driver helped Olivia back into the car. The engine hummed back to life. Jasper stood in the middle of the road, watching her leave, his entire body trembling with helpless urgency. And as the car disappeared into the fog once more, Jasper turned, gathered every ounce of strength in his aging legs, and began to run again, this time with even greater determination. He had already tried to warn her. Now he needed to stop what was coming. By the time the bridal car rolled away from the scene where Jasper had thrown himself into its path, Olivia was no longer thinking only about her dress, the ceremony, or the vows she was preparing to speak. Instead, her mind churned with questions she could not quite form into words. The image of Jasper standing before the car, rigid with fear, lingered in her thoughts like a shadow following too closely behind her steps. Inside the car, the world seemed muffled. The driver tried to lighten the moment with gentle conversation, but Olivia barely heard him. She pressed her fingertips against the cool glass of the window, watching the trees blur past as fog curled around their trunks. Her heart felt heavy, caught between love and uncertainty, between the promise of new beginning and the warning of a companion who had never failed her. She had known Jasper for years. He had seen her through the darkest nights after losing her husband. He had guarded her home, comforted her, and stayed beside her long before Daniel ever arrived in town. Jasper was not a dog prone to dramatic displays. He did not bark without cause. He did not behave erratically. His loyalty was steady, predictable, and deeply rooted. So why had he risked everything moments earlier? Her thoughts spiraled back to the sound of his claws scraping against the asphalt, the way his body trembled when she touched him, the way he looked at her as though pleading with her to understand something just beyond her reach. There was a weight in that moment she felt all over again now, sitting in the back seat of the quiet car. She closed her eyes, replaying the past few weeks with a shaky breath. Jasper's odd pacing, his refusal to leave her side, the restless nights, the way he had stood between her and Daniel every time the three of them were in the same room. She had told herself it was jealousy, or anxiety, or the adjustment to change. But as the road to the church grew narrower, those explanations felt thinner. They no longer held the same certainty they once had. Her chest tightened. Was she moving toward mistake? Outside, St. Alden's church bell chimed softly in the distance. The sound should have calmed her. Instead, it only deepened the ache growing beneath her ribs. Jasper had never been wrong about danger. Not once. She remembered a winter night when the old furnace in her cottage malfunctioned. She had been half asleep, unaware of the faint smell of smoke drifting up from the basement. Jasper had known before anyone. He had nudged her awake, barking sharply until she followed him, leading her away from harm she could not yet see. She remembered the time she slipped on the icy steps outside her home, falling hard and unable to stand. Jasper had stayed with her, pressing his warm body against her to keep her awake until help arrived. And she remembered the quiet evenings when grief still clung to her like a heavy coat, and Jasper, without being asked, lay beside her, his steady breathing easing the weight she could not share with anyone else. Jasper had saved her more times than she could count, not through drama or force, through intuition, through a bond built from shared wounds and mutual trust. And now, that same dog had tried to stop her from going to her own wedding. The car slowed as they approached the stone steps of St. Alden's. Guests stood outside, greeting one another in hushed voices. The ceremony waited. Daniel waited. Olivia placed her hand over her heart. Her fingers trembled. She wanted to believe everything was fine, that Jasper was simply overwhelmed by change, that today would be the beginning of a happier chapter. But deep inside, beneath all the preparations and reassurances, a small spark of doubt flickered. Not fear of marriage, fear of ignoring the one creature who had never failed to protect her. She took a long, unsteady breath as the car came to a full stop. If Jasper was trying to tell her something, would she be able to hear in time? When the bridal car finally stopped at the foot of St. Alden's stone steps, Olivia took a moment before stepping out. She held the bouquet close, drawing one long breath as though trying to steady the tide of doubt rising inside her. The fog had begun to lift ever so slightly, revealing the worn wooden doors of the church standing tall and solemn, just as they had for countless weddings before hers. But this time, something felt wrong. Even she could sense it now. What Olivia did not know, what none of us knew, was that Jasper was not far behind. By the time I arrived at the church grounds, guests had already begun to gather, their voices a low hum under the tall pines. Some glanced toward the road, wondering why I seemed out of breath. Others whispered with excitement, unaware of the storm quietly building beneath the surface of this quiet morning. And then, through the thinning fog, I saw a familiar shape racing toward us. Jasper. His legs moved like they carried the last hope he had left. His fur was damp from the run, his chest rising and falling with desperate, frantic breaths. The moment Olivia caught sight of him sprinting across the gravel courtyard, her face softened with something close to heartbreak. She took a step toward him, as if pulled by an invisible thread. But before she could reach him, hands reached out first. A few well-meaning guests, maybe two, maybe three, moved quickly to intercept the dog. They did not understand. They thought they were helping keep the ceremony orderly, protecting the bride from a nervous pet. One man grabbed for Jasper's collar, looping his hand through it and dragging him back with far more force than necessary. Jasper stumbled, claws scraping across the stones. Another person stepped in to assist, holding him by the shoulders as he struggled. "You cannot let him inside," someone said. "He is too worked up. He will ruin the photos," another added with a laugh. They did not hear the strain in Jasper's breathing. They did not see the panic that flashed like lightning through his eyes. They did not understand that he was not trying to join the celebration. He was trying to stop it. I stepped forward immediately, raising my voice just enough to cut through the commotion. "Easy now. Let him breathe." But the guests holding him back were so focused on keeping him still that my words slid past them. Jasper's eyes darted around until they found Olivia. He pulled against the hands restraining him, his body trembling with a heartbreaking mixture of fear and urgency. His tail was low, his ears pinned tight against his head. He made a low, anguished sound that echoed through the courtyard, quiet but filled with meaning. Olivia's steps faltered. She clutched her bouquet tighter, her knuckles whitening. For the first time, the certainty she had tried to build around herself shattered. Jasper was not acting like a dog upset over separation. He looked like an animal confronting something only he could sense. "Please," Olivia whispered, her voice barely carrying over the murmurs. "Let him come to me." The guests hesitated, glancing at one another, unsure. They loosened their grip, but they did not fully release him. Jasper used that small freedom to push forward just enough to place himself between Olivia and the church entrance. Then he turned his head toward the large wooden doors. His body stiffened. His breath hitched. He growled softly, not in aggression, but in warning. It was then I understood the truth behind his panic. Jasper was not afraid of the people holding him back. He was afraid of what waited inside the church. I moved closer, lowering my voice so only Olivia could hear. "He has been trying to tell you something for weeks. Do not ignore him now." Her eyes glistened with rising worry. She looked from me to Jasper, then back to the church door. Her heart split between love and hope, between instinct and trust. She wanted to step into the future she had prepared for. But she also knew, deep down, that Jasper had never, not once, misread danger. The church bell tolled gently above us, as if calling her forward. But Jasper leaned into her leg, refusing to let her take another step. He trembled as though the truth he carried was too heavy for his small, aging body. And just as Olivia reached down to soothe him, the wooden doors of St. Alden's creaked open. What awaited inside would change everything. The moment those heavy wooden doors creaked open, a hush fell over the courtyard. The usher standing inside motioned politely, signaling that it was time for Olivia to enter. Guests turned their attention toward her, their faces soft with anticipation, unaware of the storm gathering just a few feet away. But Jasper knew. He felt it in every trembling muscle, in every breath that shuddered through his aging body. And as Olivia hesitated, caught between the life she wanted and the warning she feared, Jasper reached his breaking point. The two guests holding him back loosened their grip just slightly, perhaps believing he had calmed down. But Jasper had not calmed. He had simply gathered strength. In a sudden surge, fueled by devotion, not panic, Jasper twisted free from their hands. His movements were swift, precise, almost practiced, as though instinct itself had taken control. Before anyone could react, he lunged toward the church entrance. His paws struck the stone steps with force, claws scraping loudly as he bounded upward. The usher barely had time to gasp before Jasper collided with the partially open door. The sound reverberated through the courtyard like a deep, hollow drum. The door slammed inward, swinging far wider than anyone expected. It struck the inner wall with a sharp crack, and the echo of that impact traveled through the vaulted ceiling of St. Alden's like a startled cry. Guests gasped. A few shouted. Olivia froze, her bouquet trembling. I took a step forward, knowing this was the moment everything would change. Inside the church, time seemed to bend. The long aisle stretched ahead like a narrow corridor of light and shadow. Candles flickered along the pews, their flames quivering as the cold air rushed in from outside. At the far end, under the arch of stained glass, Daniel stood waiting. The expression on his face, once calm and practiced, shifted suddenly, just enough for anyone who knew how to read people to see something buried beneath the surface. Fear, not fear the dog. Fear what the dog would reveal. Jasper's paws skidded against the polished wooden floor as he sprinted inside. His breath came in sharp bursts, his eyes locked on Daniel with a focus so fierce it silenced the room. There was nothing chaotic in his movements anymore. He was not lashing out. He was charging toward a truth only he understood. "Stop that dog!" someone yelled, breaking the silence. But no one moved fast enough. Jasper raced down the aisle with the determination of a creature who had run out of time. His fur brushed against the pews as he passed, sending startled whispers through the wedding guests. Some stepped back. Others clutched their chests. A few older ladies crossed themselves instinctively, as though witnessing something far greater than a misbehaving pet. Olivia stumbled forward, torn between reaching for Jasper and calling him back. Her voice cracked in the air. "Jasper, no, wait." But Jasper did not wait. He reached the midpoint of the aisle and slid slightly, his paws scrambling for traction before he regained balance. In that moment, every eye in the church followed his path. Even the priest paused mid-sentence, watching with a mixture of surprise and concern. And then, as if guided by something beyond instinct, Jasper came to a sudden stop, placing himself directly between Olivia and Daniel, facing the man she was about to marry. His body curved protectively around her, his stance low and braced. A growl rose deep from Jasper's chest. Not loud, not violent, but full of warning. Daniel stiffened. His hand moved, too quickly, too instinctively, toward the pocket of his vest. And that tiny, almost invisible motion was enough. Enough for Jasper. Enough for me. Enough for the truth to begin surfacing through the gorgeous haze of a wedding day. In that breathless instant, the entire room seemed to recognize what Jasper had known for weeks. Something was wrong. Terribly, unmistakably wrong. Olivia's eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth. She looked at Jasper, then at Daniel, then back at the dog who had never failed her. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Jasper, what are you trying to tell me?" But before she could take another step, before anyone could intervene, Jasper acted again, seizing the last of the time he had left to protect a woman he loved like a part of his own soul. And what he did next would shatter the illusion of that wedding forever. The moment before Jasper moved again felt like the breath before a storm breaks open across the sea. Silence filled the church, stretched tight like a wire, fragile enough to snap with the slightest motion. Guests leaned forward unconsciously, their eyes wide, caught somewhere between disbelief and dread. And then, in that suspended stillness, Jasper took a decisive step toward Daniel. There was nothing chaotic in his movement now. No wild jumps, no frantic scrambling. Instead, he walked slowly, one paw placed firmly in front of the other, his body low, controlled, deliberate. His eyes never left Daniel. They were sharp, focus, burning with a certainty animals carry when instinct becomes truth. I knew that posture well. I had seen it in K9 dogs on the brink of signaling a threat. I had seen it when trained partners stood between their handlers and the danger they could sense tightening in the air. Jasper was not confused. He was not acting out. He was confronting. Daniel stiffened the moment Jasper began to advance. It was a subtle shift, shoulders tense, jaw clenched, breath caught, but I saw it. Anyone with decades of reading human behavior would have seen it. And more importantly, Jasper saw it long before we did. Olivia gasped softly and reached out a hand, but Jasper moved past her in a protective arc, positioning himself between her and Daniel. His back curved just enough to brush her dress, reassuring her even as he shielded her. The groom's smile faltered. What had moments earlier been a confident expression now cracked around the edges. He lifted one hand slightly, as though trying to gesture something innocent, but it trembled ever so faintly. "It is all right," Daniel said, attempting a calm tone. "He is just confused." Jasper's deep, resonant growl rolled through the church like distant thunder. Confused was the one thing Jasper was not. The priest stepped forward, clearly unsettled, yet hesitant to intervene. Olivia's breathing grew ragged. The wedding guests exchanged whispers, confusion, concern, even fear beginning to take root. I took a slow step into the aisle, my eyes fixed on Daniel. I had seen men under pressure countless times. Some folded, some fought, some lied their way through it with a charm polished by years of practice. But in this moment, Daniel was not calm. He was calculating. Jasper took another step. Daniel's hand drifted instinctively toward the inside pocket of his vest. That was it. A low warning erupted from Jasper's chest, sharper this time, vibrating with urgency. He lunged forward, not to bite, not to attack, but to signal danger in the only language he knew. His body blocked Daniel's path entirely, forcing the man to take a quick step back. Daniel's face lost color. His pupils tightened. For the first time since he arrived in our quiet town, the polished charm he wore like armor slipped, revealing something unguarded underneath. Something Jasper had sensed from the very beginning. "Get that dog away," Daniel muttered, the strain in his voice betraying him. "He is ruining everything." Ruining everything. That was an odd choice of words for a man who was supposedly moments away from pledging his life to someone he loved. Guests shifted uneasily. Even the priest looked uncertain now. Olivia clutched her own hands, knuckles white, as tears began to shine in her eyes. She stared at Jasper, then at Daniel, then back at Jasper again, as though trying to make sense of a puzzle whose edges suddenly refused to fit. And then Jasper made the final move that would crack the truth wide open. With a swift, precise motion, one born not from aggression but from revelation, Jasper leapt upward and gripped the edge of Daniel's vest. The fabric tore with a sharp rip that echoed through the church like a verdict. Something metallic fell from Daniel's pocket and clattered onto the stone floor, the sound ringing out like the toll of a warning bell. Gasps filled the room. Daniel froze. Olivia's hand flew to her mouth. I stepped forward instantly. The small object, innocent in appearance yet utterly out of place, rolled to a stop at Jasper's paws. And for the first time, every single person inside that church understood that the dog's frantic warnings were not confusion, jealousy, or misbehavior. Jasper had seen what none of us had: danger. And now, in the middle of that holy place, as the truth lay trembling on the stone floor, the entire room felt the shift, the realization that the wedding we gathered for was unraveling thread by thread, and Jasper was the only one brave enough to pull the first stitch. What happened next unfolded so quickly that even now, years later, I still recall it in slow motion, as though my mind refuses to forget a single detail. The small metallic object that had rolled across the stone floor still trembled from the impact when Jasper made his final, decisive move. And in that moment, every ounce of tension that had been building, his sleepless nights, his pacing, his warning cries, seemed to converge into a single act of undeniable truth. Daniel tried to step away from Jasper, his hand jerking toward his vest as if to hide something. But Jasper was faster. With a sudden surge of instinct, he lunged again, not with aggression but with absolute clarity of purpose. His teeth caught the edge of Daniel's vest pocket a second time, sinking into the fabric with a grip firm enough to tear, but controlled enough not to harm. The sound of ripping material cut through the church like a jagged knife. The crowd gasped as the expensive cloth tore open under Jasper's pull. Threads snapped. Buttons popped loose and scattered across the aisle. Daniel staggered backward, losing his balance for a heartbeat, eyes wide with shock. Not the shock of a man wronged, but the shock of someone exposed. Another object slid free from the torn pocket, smaller than the first. It landed on the polished wood with muted metallic tap, drawing every gaze downward as it rolled to a halt near the front pew. The room fell into complete silence, so deep that even the candles seemed to steady themselves, their flames no longer wavering. Daniel's face drained of color. His hands hovered awkwardly at his sides, suspended between defense and denial. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. His throat worked in a swallow, his composure cracking like thin ice beneath weight it could not hold. Beside me, an elderly woman whispered, "Dear heavens!" And though the sentence faded into the stillness, the fear behind it did not. Jasper stood tall now, chest heaving, tail rigid, every sense sharpened to a point. He positioned himself between Daniel and Olivia once more, blocking her view of the man she thought she knew. His eyes, dark and unwavering, flicked toward the objects on the floor, not with confusion, but with recognition. He had smelled whatever those items carried long before they ever surfaced. Olivia's hand shook violently as she took a step forward. "Daniel, what is that?" Her voice cracked, not with accusation but with heartbreak already forming. Daniel stumbled over his words. "It is nothing, just something for stress, just something I found online." But his tone wavered, brittle as glass, collapsing under its own weight. There was a heaviness in the air, a palpable dread that made even the priest take a step back. For years, I had witnessed moments when truth demanded to be seen. Truth rarely arrives gently. Sometimes it crashes through your life like a storm, and sometimes, like today, it arrives on four legs, wrapped in loyalty. I knelt beside the fallen objects, examining them carefully without touching. Their appearance was simple, almost unremarkable, but their presence inside a groom's vest pocket on his wedding day made them far from innocent. One carried a faint smell, sharp, unfamiliar, chemical in a way that made the hairs on the back of my neck rise. I stood slowly, turning to face Daniel. "Why were these in your pocket?" My voice was calm, but the meaning behind it was not. Daniel's gaze darted around the room, searching for an escape he could not find. Guests shifted uncomfortably, their faces twisting with confusion, suspicion, even fear. Olivia looked shattered, her eyes glistening with tears she struggled to hold back. She clutched her bouquet against her chest, as though trying to hold together the pieces of her heart. Jasper moved closer to her, sensing her pain, nudging her gently with his head. Even now, even in the midst of chaos, he returned to her side, because that was who he was. A guardian, a witness, a protector who had been fighting to keep her safe long before anyone else understood why. Daniel finally broke the silence with a weak attempt at laughter. "This is ridiculous. It is being blown out of proportion. The dog is just..." But he stopped, because no one believed him anymore. The room had shifted. Trust had been severed. And Jasper's instincts, once dismissed, now stood before all of us, undeniable and true. What happened on that aisle was not a misunderstanding. It was a revelation. And as I looked into Daniel's eyes, I saw something flicker there. Something sharp. Something he had tried desperately to hide. Jasper had not only smelled it, he had known it. And now, he had forced the truth into the light. What lay on the church floor seemed, at first glance, like nothing more than an insignificant piece of metal. Small, unremarkable, the kind of thing anyone might overlook if they were not trained to notice what did not belong. But the moment my eyes fell upon it, a ripple of unease moved through me. And judging by the shifting silence in the room, I was not the only one who felt it. Jasper stood rigidly beside Olivia, his gaze locked onto the fallen object, as though it contained every answer he had been trying to give her for weeks. His ears were pressed flat, his body completely still except for the rapid rise and fall of his chest. It was not aggression. It was vigilance. I stepped forward carefully, mindful not to alarm anyone further. The guests parted instinctively, making room, their whispers dying one by one until the only sound left was the faint crackle of the church candles. The object lay near the front pew, its metallic surface catching the light from the stained glass windows above. I crouched down slowly, observing it without touching. Years of service had taught me that first impressions mattered, and that sometimes what seemed simple carried a weight far greater than its size. Olivia's voice trembled behind me. "Sheriff, what is it?" I did not answer right away. I studied the item, noting its shape, the smoothness along one edge, the faint residue clinging to the surface. Whatever it was, it had no place in a groom's vest pocket on the morning of a wedding. And Jasper's reaction, the intensity of it, told me it was something he recognized not by sight, but by scent. Dogs do not respond to objects unless they carry meaning. Jasper had not been warning us about nothing. Daniel, pale and fidgeting now, stepped forward with forced confidence. "It is nothing harmful. Just something I carry to help with nerves. A personal item." His voice cracked under the weight of too many watching eyes. "Please, this is being blown out of proportion." But the room no longer moved with him. Trust had shifted, quietly, firmly, toward the dog standing guard beside his mistress. I lifted my gaze to Daniel, keeping my voice calm but steady. "Then you will not mind telling us exactly what it is." He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, Jasper let out a low, sharp bark, just one, directed squarely at the object. It was the kind of bark that told you everything without a single explanation. A warning, a call for caution. Olivia flinched at the sound. Her breathing grew uneven as she stared at the item on the floor, then at Daniel's face. "Why was this in your pocket?" she asked, her voice breaking. And why would Jasper react like that? Daniel could not answer. Or maybe he would not. His eyes darted between the guests, then toward the open door behind him, just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough for me to see panic rising inside him. A man with nothing to hide does not look for the fastest way out of a room. I leaned in closer, examining the object again but still not touching it. "It smells," I murmured, mostly to myself, but loud enough for those nearest to hear. "Not strong, but sharp. Unnatural." Several guests shifted uncomfortably. Olivia covered her mouth with her trembling hand. "Jasper kept sensing it," she whispered. "That is why he would not let Daniel near me." For the first time since the ceremony began, Daniel's expression hardened. Something cold flickered behind his eyes. Something that did not belong in a man about to take sacred vows. "This is absurd," he snapped, his voice rising. "You are all jumping to conclusions because of a dog." Jasper growled, not loud, but deep, a sound that vibrated across the wooden floorboards and lodged itself in every chest present. The growl of a dog who had reached the limit of patience. I straightened up slowly, meeting Daniel's gaze with a calmness I had learned from decades of knowing when a person's mask was slipping. "He is not just a dog," I said quietly. "He is the one telling the truth." Gasps rippled through the congregation. Olivia's tears spilled freely now, not from confusion, but from the painful realization taking hold inside her. She reached out and touched Jasper's head, her fingers trembling. "You were trying to protect me," she whispered to him. "You knew." And for the first time since the ceremony began, Jasper's stance shifted. His body softened slightly at her touch, but his eyes stayed trained on Daniel, because the danger had not passed. Not yet. The object lying at our feet was not just suspicious. It was a sign, a symbol, a warning that the truth was larger than we understood. And as sunlight filtered through the stained glass and illuminated that small piece of metal, I felt a chill run down my spine. Whatever this was, Jasper had dragged it into the light for a reason. What happened next was the kind of moment that changes the air in a room. 1 second, the church was filled with tense whispers. The next, it felt as though the entire building exhaled, waiting for the truth to surface. And it did, slowly, painfully, like a tide dragging something long buried up the shore. Daniel stood rigid, his face caught somewhere between anger and fear. His polished charm, the easy smile he had worn since the day he arrived in town, had vanished completely. In its place was a raw, unsettled expression that told me more than any confession ever could. Olivia clutched Jasper's fur with trembling fingers, her voice barely rising above a whisper. Daniel, what were you carrying? Why would Jasper react like this? Daniel opened his mouth, but the explanation he reached for collapsed before it could form. His eyes darted toward the small metal object still lying near the pew, then toward me, then toward the exit, as though his thoughts were scrambling for an escape. I took a step forward, keeping my voice steady. You can end this right now by telling the truth. His jaw tightened, and then something inside him cracked. Fine, he snapped, his tone sharp and impatient. It is nothing you need to worry about. I have been under stress. I needed something to calm me down. Everyone here is overreacting because of a dog. A murmur rippled through the guests, disbelief, discomfort, suspicion. Jasper growled softly, not aggressively, but with a certainty that made Daniel recoil. I held his gaze. Stress does not make a man hide objects in his pocket on his wedding day. And stress does not make a dog like Jasper react as though someone he loves is in danger. Daniel's eyes flicked to Olivia, only for a moment. But in that heartbeat, something dark surfaced in his expression. A tension, a coldness, a flash of irritation too quick for most to see, but not quick enough to escape Jasper. The dog pressed closer to Olivia, shielding her. Olivia's breath hitched. Daniel, why do you look like that? What are you not telling me? Silence. And then, almost by accident, the truth began to spill out. One of the guests, Mrs. Fallon, an older woman known for recognizing faces better than most, stepped forward slowly, squinting at Daniel as though a memory had just returned to her. I know you, she whispered. You were in that news story last year, the financial investigation in Boston, the one where you left before answering questions. The church rustled with a wave of shock. Daniel's face drained of color. That was nothing, he muttered quickly. A misunderstanding. I told everyone. No, Mrs. Fallon interrupted gently. You never explained. You disappeared. Olivia backed away one step, her voice trembling. You told me you left Boston because you wanted a quiet life. You said there was nothing complicated in your past. Daniel lifted both hands in frustration. Because I knew this would happen. People judge. People talk. I wanted a fresh start. I watched him carefully. His words were practiced, worn smooth by repetition. Not the voice of a man defending himself, but the voice of a man who had rehearsed this excuse too many times. And the object in your pocket? I asked quietly, does your fresh start require that too? He glared at me, resentment flaring. It was for me, not for anyone else. I said it was harmless. If it were harmless, I replied, Jasper would not have reacted the way he did. He has never been wrong. Daniel's composure continued to crumble. A bead of sweat traced down his temple. His breathing quickened. He looked less like a groom and more like a man who had just been cornered by the truth he had tried so hard to bury. Olivia's voice finally broke. Daniel, what else have you lied about? Her question struck him harder than anything any of us had said. His shoulders sagged, his expression flickering between guilt and annoyance. He looked at Olivia, not with love, but with calculation, as though deciding how much of the truth he could afford to reveal. You do not understand, he said quietly. I needed a new beginning, a chance to make things right. I did not want my past to ruin everything. But you brought it here, Olivia whispered, tears spilling freely. You brought it to our wedding. You brought it into my life without telling me the truth. Jasper stepped in front of her again, his body firm and unwavering. And in that moment, the church seemed to understand what Jasper had known all along. Daniel had not come into Olivia's life with honesty. He had come with secrets. Secrets heavy enough to leave a trace that only Jasper could sense. A long silence followed, stretching like a thread pulled too tight. And though Daniel tried to gather himself, tried to rebuild the mask he had worn for months, the cracks were now too deep. The truth had stepped into the light, and there was no going back. As the weight of Daniel's hidden past settled into the room, a realization began to bloom in my mind, one tied not to the object itself, but to Jasper's unwavering reaction to it. I knelt again, leaning closer, this time focusing not on the shape or shine of the item, but on the faint trail of scent that clung to it like a whisper. It was subtle, but it carried something sharp, something unnatural, something that did not belong in the peaceful rhythm of Olivia's life. And suddenly, so many pieces fell into place. I rose slowly, turning toward Olivia. "He has smelled this before," I said quietly, "long before today." Olivia froze, her eyes widening. "What do you mean?" Jasper looked up at me, as if urging me to finish the truth he had been trying to deliver for weeks. I exhaled. "That scent, whatever is on that object, it is not new to him. He has been reacting to it around the house. On your clothes, on your things. Every time Daniel visited. The memory of Jasper pacing in the cottage, the restless nights, the way he kept nudging Olivia toward the back door instead of letting her stand near Daniel, the way he slept lightly, waking at every small noise. All of it made sense now. Dogs notice what we overlook," I continued softly. "They smell what we cannot." He was not just uneasy around Daniel. He was reacting to the scent, the same trace days ago. A murmur swept through the church. Some guests covered their mouths. Others exchanged fearful looks. And Olivia, with trembling fingers still pressed to her lips, seemed to grow even smaller beneath the weight of the truth unraveling around her. Her voice broke. "So every time Jasper tried to warn me, it was because he knew what Daniel was carrying?" "Yes," I said gently. "He could smell it on Daniel's hands, his clothes, maybe even on things he touched in your home. Something about that scent alarmed him. He tried to tell you the only way he knew how." Jasper stepped closer to her, resting his head lightly against her thigh, as if to say he had been trying to protect her long before today. Daniel let out a harsh laugh, forced, brittle. "This is absurd. You are all acting like the dog understands chemistry." I turned, leveling my gaze at him. "He understands danger." My voice was calm, but it carried an old authority no one could mistake. "And that is enough." Daniel's jaw tightened again. A flash of irritation, darker this time, crossed his face. "You do not even know what that is," he said. "You are all making wild accusations." "I know what it is not," I replied. "It is not harmless, and it is not something an honest man brings to his wedding." The church grew so quiet that even the candles seemed to lean in. And then, with a trembling voice that cut straight through every layer of tension, Olivia spoke. "Jasper smelled on you long before today," she said to Daniel, "and you knew something was wrong. You saw him react, but you never explained a thing." Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. His composure was slipping faster now. His hands twitched. A bead of sweat slid down the side of his neck. And all the while, Jasper never looked away from him, not for a second. He was afraid. Olivia whispered, "Not of you, but of what you carried, of what you brought into my home." Her next words trembled with grief. "Why, Daniel? Why would you hide this from me?" Daniel looked around, the guests, the priest, me, and finally Olivia, each face reflecting doubt, fear, betrayal. He swallowed hard, eyes darting once more toward the open church door. A man ready to run. Jasper sensed it instantly. His fur bristled. His stance hardened. A low growl rumbled deep in his chest. A warning that Daniel's moment of truth would not be allowed to slip away. I took a single step forward. "Tell her," I said quietly. "Tell her what Jasper already knows." In that moment, under the stained glass windows and the trembling light of the candles, the truth hovered between us like a storm ready to break. And for the first time since walking into this church, Daniel's face revealed exactly what Jasper had smelled all along. Fear, guilt, and something far more dangerous. What unfolded next did not happen in one loud moment, but in a series of quiet fractures, small breaks that spread through the church like cracks traveling across glass. One instant, the ceremony still held its shape. The next, it was unraveling thread by thread, pulled apart by truth, instinct, and the unmistakable fear in Daniel's eyes. The weight of Jasper's warnings, the suspicious object on the floor, and Daniel's shifting demeanor had already unsettled the guests. Now, as Olivia stepped back from him, her breath catching in her throat, the entire room felt a shift. Her bouquet trembled slightly in her hands. Her shoulders lowered as though something heavy had just been lifted off her. But in its place, an even heavier realization settled in. "Daniel," she whispered, voice quivering, "were you ever honest with me?" Her words echoed through the silence, landing like the final toll of a bell. Daniel made a desperate attempt to compose himself, lifting his hands in a gesture that was meant to be calming, but instead struck everyone as frantic. "Olivia, listen. I was trying to protect you. I did not want my past to follow me here. I needed a fresh start. That is all." But his voice lacked the warmth it once had. The charm that had drawn Olivia months ago was gone, replaced by an edge that revealed more than his explanations ever could. And standing between them, steady, loyal, unwavering, was Jasper, his body tense, his gaze locked onto the man he had tried so hard to warn her about. The priest cleared his throat, uncertain, glancing between bride and groom. Guests shifted in their seats, murmuring anxiously. A few older women clutched their scarves tighter, sensing that this day, meant for joy and unity, was inching dangerously close to heartbreak. I stepped forward carefully, making sure my voice held the quiet authority needed in moments like this. "Olivia, you do not have to decide anything right now, but you deserve the truth. All of it." Daniel's composure cracked. "This is absurd. You are all letting a dog dictate your judgment." At that, Jasper let out a deep, resonant growl, a sound that filled the entire church. Not threatening, not vicious, but certain, a sound born from weeks of sleepless vigilance and desperate attempts to protect the only person he had left in the world. And for Olivia, that sound was a breaking point. Her knees wavered, her breathing hitched, tears gathered in her eyes, not from fear, but from the painful realization of how close she had come to stepping into a life she knew nothing about. She looked at Daniel, not with love, not with anger, but with sorrow so profound it silenced the room. "You asked me to trust you," she said softly, "but you never gave me the truth to stand on." Daniel's face twisted, not with heartbreak, but with frustration, almost indignation. He took a step toward her, but Jasper immediately stepped forward as well, blocking him. The message was unmistakable. "Do not come any closer." Someone in the pews gasped. Another began to cry softly. The church was no longer a place of celebration, but a stage where truth could no longer be hidden. Daniel's voice hardened. "You are making a mistake." Olivia shook her head. "No, the mistake would have been saying I do to a man who needed to hide so much from me." Her words cut the air like a clean blade. The priest closed his book, slowly, with trembling hands. Guests began to stand, some reaching out to steady Olivia, others moving back as Daniel's expression darkened. The stained glass windows glowed with morning light, casting long beams across the aisle, beams that fell directly on Jasper, illuminating his gray fur like a quiet halo. In that moment, it was clear to everyone in the room. It was not Jasper who ruined the wedding. It was the lies that could no longer stay buried. Daniel looked around the church, at the guests, at the priest, at Olivia with her trembling hands, and something inside him snapped. His face twisted into a look I had hoped never to see on such a day. Anger, resentment, realization that his mask had fallen completely. He took a step back, then another, as though retreating from the truth unraveling around him. And just like that, the ceremony, planned with love, hope, and gentleness, collapsed in the most unexpected way, not with broken vows, not with raised voices, but with one woman stepping away from a future built on deception, and one old dog proving, in front of everyone, that loyalty and instinct can save a life long before danger becomes clear. In the quiet that followed the collapse of the ceremony, the world seemed to move in slow motion around Olivia. Guests murmured in hushed tones, chairs scraped across the wooden floor as people shifted uncertainly, and the stained glass colors flickered across her white dress like fractured pieces of something once whole. She stood there in the center of it all, her bouquet wilting slightly in her trembling hands, feeling the shock settle into her bones like winter frost. Just moments earlier, she had been ready to walk toward a new beginning. Now she was standing at the edge of a truth she had never imagined. Watching the future, she prepared for dissolve into the cold morning air. When Daniel slipped out of church, disappearing between the tall pines like a shadow fleeing the light, no one followed him, not even Olivia. especially not Olivia. Her knees weakened. Her breath trembled. Her heart felt as though someone had pressed a weight against it, heavy enough to bruise, but not enough to break. She lowered her bouquet to her side and stared at the floor where the small metallic object still rested, a quiet reminder of how close she had come to stepping into something she did not understand. Jasper pressed against her leg gently, anchoring her with the steady warmth of his body. She looked down at him, and the moment their eyes met, something inside her cracked, not with anger, but with relief. Relief that she had been protected. Relief that she had not walked blindly into a life shaped by lies. Relief that someone who loved her without condition, had stood between her and the edge of a cliff she had not seen. Her voice shook as she whispered, "You saved me again." Jasper nudged her hand, his touch soft and full of the loyalty that carried him through every warning he had tried to give. I approached her slowly, giving her space but staying close enough to offer the steadiness she deserved. "You are allowed to feel everything at once," I said gently. "Shock, grief, anger, even gratitude. None of it makes you weak." She swallowed hard, tears welling in her eyes but refusing to fall. I thought he was good. I wanted to believe that. "That does not make you foolish," I said, my voice steady. "It makes you human." A long silence followed, the kind that holds room for breath, but not yet for words. Olivia's shoulders shook once, twice, before she lifted her chin slowly. The sorrow in her eyes did not disappear, but it shifted, softened, found a place to rest. "I will not fall apart today," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. "I have already survived losing a husband. I have already survived lonely winters and nights without sleep. I will survive this." Her voice, though quiet, carried a strength that settled over the room, like a warm blanket. She took another breath, deeper this time, steadying herself on her own terms. Guests began approaching her gently, some offering words of comfort, others simply placing a hand on her shoulder. No one judged her. No one pitted her. They understood that heartbreak, when met with truth, becomes something entirely different, a crossroads instead of a wound. I watched her carefully, admiring the grace with which she held her own heart. Even in the middle of devastation, even with her wedding in ruins around her, Olivia did not collapse. She bent, yes, but she did not break. Jasper remained pressed to her side, every muscle poised, every breath steady, as if reminding her that she did not need to walk through this moment alone. She reached down and rested her hand on his head, her fingers weaving into his fur, like she was grounding herself in the one truth she could still trust. "Let's go home," she finally said, her voice steadier than before. "You and me, Jasper, just like always." The strength in those simple words held more power than any vow she might have spoken that day. They were not about defeat. They were about choosing herself, choosing clarity, choosing the love that had never betrayed her. And as we walked her out of the church, past the fractured remnants of what might have been, I realized something important. Some weddings end in joy, some end in heartbreak, but the ones that end in truth, those are the ones that save lives. In the days that followed the collapse ceremony, the story spread through our little Maine town the way fog rolls across the harbor. Quiet at first, then unmistakable. People spoke in softened voices at the market, paused their conversations on porches, and exchanged long, thoughtful looks whenever Olivia's name was mentioned. It was not gossip, not the sharp-edged chatter that tears a person down. It was something else entirely. It was concern, sympathy, and a deep, collective astonishment at what had unfolded inside St. Alden's Church. You must understand something about our town. We are not quick to judge, but we are quick to protect our own. And Olivia Harper, with her gentle heart and quiet strength, had earned a place in the community long before Daniel Reed ever stepped into her life. So when word spread about Jasper, the loyal old dog who had sensed something none of us could see, people listened. They listened because they trusted him almost as much as they trusted her. At the bakery, Mrs. Porter was the first to bring it up. She leaned over the counter, lowering her voice, yet unable to hide the tremor of emotion beneath it. "That dog saved her," she said. "If you ask me, animals notice things humans miss. They feel danger long before we ever think to look for it." Over at the harbor, the fishermen gathered near the docks, shaking their heads as they discussed what had happened. "A man hides his past like that," one of them murmured. "He is bound to hide other things, too." Another added softly, "Good thing Jasper was there. Dogs do not turn restless for no reason." Even at the library, where conversations usually floated around books and weather patterns, the story found its way between the shelves. People wondered how long Jasper had been sensing something was wrong, how many times he had tried to warn Olivia, how he must have felt, fighting through obedience and age, trying to pull her away from danger in the only ways he knew. And through it all, as the whispers grew, the admiration for Jasper did too. Children who passed Olivia's cottage would often pause at her gate, hoping to catch a glimpse of the brave old dog who had stopped the wedding. Some left small offerings, daisies, feathers, hand-drawn pictures of a dog with a big, loyal heart. The parents never discouraged them. In fact, many stood quietly behind their children, a look of gratitude softening their features. One afternoon, I overheard a group of neighbors speaking outside the general store. Their voices were thoughtful, not cruel. "She must be heartbroken," one said. "Yes," another replied gently. "But she is not alone. Jasper will see her through this." Then came the words that stayed with me. "Sometimes the hardest truths are the ones that save us." Those words carried to the town like a warm current, reminding us that heartbreak does not end a story. It redirects it. Olivia, for a part, stayed mostly indoors in those first days, not to hide, but to breathe, to process, to rest. And every time she stepped outside, she walked with Jasper beside her, his pace slower but his presence strong enough to keep her steady. People did not overwhelm her with questions. Instead, they offered kindness in quiet gestures. Fresh bread left on her porch, handwritten notes tucked into her mailbox, warm soups delivered in simple jars. They respected her silence, believing that when she was ready, she would find her voice again. But the loudest conversation in town was not about Olivia or Daniel. It was about Jasper, about his instincts, his loyalty, his ability to sense the truth long before it ever reached human ears. Some folks said he was a miracle. Others said he was simply a dog with a heart big enough to hear what people refused to notice. But all of them agreed on one thing. Jasper had saved Olivia from a life she never deserved. And as the days continued to unfold and the story settled deeper into the town's memory, people began to look at their own dogs differently, pausing a little longer when their pets hesitated at a doorway, listening a little more closely when a dog seemed uneasy, feeling gratitude for a kind of love no human heart could ever fully replicate. Because after everything that happened, there was one truth no one could deny. Jasper had seen what none of us saw, and he never stopped trying to protect the woman who had once rescued him from the edge of the sea. In a town as small and tightly woven as ours, stories rarely belong to just one person. They travel, reshape themselves, and linger in ways none of us can predict. And as the days passed after the wedding that never was, I found myself thinking about it more often than I expected, not only as a sheriff who had witnessed the truth unfold, but as a man who had lived long enough to understand how fragile and precious human trust can be. From where I stood, just a few steps back from Olivia and Jasper as everything came undone, I saw more than a ceremony collapsing. I saw a lesson none of us would forget. I saw the moment when hope collided with instinct. I saw the split second when a woman's heart recognized a truth her mind had tried to ignore. And I saw, with absolute clarity, the depth of loyalty only a dog can give. You learn a lot about people when something shatters in front of them. Some panic, some deny, some grow angry at the truth for arriving too soon. But Olivia, she broke open quietly, the way an old tree bends under the weight of a winter storm yet manages to remain standing. I had watched her rebuild her life once before, after the loss of her husband. I knew she would rebuild again, painfully, slowly, but with a dignity some folks spend their entire lives searching for. And Jasper, well, he showed me something I had spent decades teaching young officers, but had never been able to put into words so clearly. In my years working alongside police dogs, I had come to trust their instincts more than anything written in a report. But Jasper taught me that loyalty is not just a skill. It is a kind of knowing, a kind of truth-telling that has no agenda, no hesitation. He had sensed something long, before the rest of us felt even a ripple, when he broke free from that leash, when he threw himself in front of the bridal car, when he tore the fabric of Daniel's vest, dragging the truth into daylight. Those were not random acts of panic. Those were the actions of a creature who loved someone enough to stand in the path of danger without understanding the cost. And from my perspective, standing near the altar that day, I could see the fear in Daniel's eyes long before he opened his mouth. Not the fear of a dog, the fear of a man whose hidden truth had finally run out of room to hide. There's a particular look people get when they realize the life they have been pretending to live is slipping through their fingers. I saw that look, clear as the tide pulling away from the shore. But what stayed with me most wasn't Daniel's guilt or even Olivia's heartbreak. It was the sight of Jasper after the ceremony, standing close to her, leaning gently against her leg, as though he understood she was walking through a kind of quiet devastation. He did not bark. He did not pace. He simply stayed present. And in that stillness, he offered her more comfort than any word spoken by men could have given. As sheriff, I have seen storms tear roofs from houses and fishermen lose their boats to the sea. I have stood beside families who learn news that change their lives forever. I have witnessed loss, courage, joy, and pain braided together in ways that make you question what the world is trying to teach us. But that day, that moment inside St. Alden's, it reminded me that sometimes the bravest act is not a shout or a strike. Sometimes it is a dog stepping forward when everyone else steps back. A dog who knows what danger smells like. A dog who refuses to be silent when someone he loves is walking toward it. A dog who carries loyalty not as a duty, but as the deepest language his heart can speak. So when people around town whispered in awe about how Jasper stopped a wedding, I corrected them every time. He didn't stop a wedding, I said. He saved a life. And even now, as I tell you this story, I can still see the way he stood between Olivia and the man she thought she knew, not with anger, not with fear, but with a quiet, steadfast courage that comes only from love, a courage I have rarely seen in humans. After the town settled into its quiet rhythm once more, after the whispers softened into understanding rather than shock, Olivia and Jasper did what survivors always do. They began again, not quickly, not with a triumphant energy some people imagine recovery to look like, but gently, in small steps, the kind that come from choosing to live with clarity rather than fear. From my porch, I often watched Olivia in those first weeks. She walked slower than before, her shoulders rounded, her gaze lower to ground as though searching for pieces of herself scattered across the days that followed the broken ceremony. But she was never alone. Jasper moved beside her with the steady patience of an old guardian. His gait was slower, yes, but each step carried purpose, as if he knew the path they walked had to be taken together. The first real sign of healing came one crisp morning when I passed by her cottage while doing my rounds. Olivia was on the front porch, sweeping away the fallen pine needles. The motion was soft but deliberate, and when she paused to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, I saw something in her expression I had not seen since before the wedding. Peace. Fragile, yes, but real. Jasper lay at her feet, his eyes half closed, basking in the comfort of a routine that had returned after weeks of storm. He lifted his head when he saw me, thumping his tail once against the wooden boards. A greeting, a reassurance, as if to say, "We are getting there." Olivia noticed a gesture and offered me a faint smile. "I am trying," she said quietly, almost apologetically. I nodded. Trying is enough. It always has been. In truth, beginning again after heartbreak is not a single moment. It is a series of choices, 1,000 small decisions that gently guide a person back to themselves. Olivia started taking morning walks along the cliffside paths again. Jasper always led the way, ears perked, slowing only when she faltered, quickening when she seemed ready for more. Sometimes she paused at the edge of the overlook, gazing at the sea as if reading wisdom in the tide. Jasper would sit beside her, pressing his shoulder against her leg. No words, no explanations, just presence. The kind of presence that asks nothing and gives everything. And slowly, those walks grew longer. Her steps gained confidence. Her breaths grew steadier. She began tending to her garden again, replanting herbs that had withered, pruning rose bushes that had grown wild, brushing soil off her palms with a sense of quiet renewal. Jasper followed her from patch to patch, sniffing the earth as if approving every small decision she made. One afternoon, I found her repainting the front gate. She stopped long enough to wave at me, and in that simple gesture I saw strength returning to her frame. Not the kind that appears bold or loud, but the kind that grows in the aftermath of truth. The kind that comes from surviving. Inside her home, she removed the wedding decorations slowly, not with bitterness but with acceptance. She folded the dress, placed a bouquet, now dried, into a small wooden box, and tucked it into her attic, as though acknowledging the past without letting it define her. And Jasper, witness to every gesture, stayed near. He slept beside her bed again, but now his sleep was deep, peaceful. No pacing, no restless nights, no watching shadows that did not belong. His work, for the first time in weeks, was no longer rooted in fear. It was rooted in healing. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the horizon and cast a warm amber glow across the cottage, I stopped by to check on them. Olivia stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame, arms folded gently around herself. She looked older, perhaps, but also clearer, truer. "I thought I had lost everything again," she said softly. "But it turns out I was protected from losing even more." Jasper nudged her side, tail sweeping softly across the porch. She looked down at him and whispered, "We start fresh, do you hear me? Just you and me." And Jasper, with all the wisdom an old dog can carry, rested his head against her knee. From my place at the gate, I felt something loosen in the air, a weight lifting not just from her, but from all of us who had watched her walk through pain with such grace. Beginning again is never easy, but Olivia was doing it the only way that matters. Slowly, honestly, and with the one companion who had proven that love, in its purest form, is protective, patient, and fiercely loyal. And as I walked away, I knew this much for certain. Their new beginning was not a return to what life had been. It was a start of something steadier, wiser, and far more true. As Olivia and Jasper slowly rebuilt their quiet life, something remarkable began to unfold. Something none of us expected, and all of us welcomed with open hearts. What started as whispered admiration for Jasper's loyalty soon transformed into something larger, something that breathed warmth back into our community. And from where I stood, watching it happen piece by piece, it felt like a kind of healing none of us had known we needed. It began with small moments. A widow stopped by Olivia's gate one morning with a basket of muffins and asked, almost shyly, if Jasper might sit beside her for a few minutes. She had been struggling to sleep since her husband's passing. Jasper walked over, sat down without being asked, and rested his head gently on her knee. The woman cried softly, not from sadness, but from relief, and later told me it was the first time in months she felt calm. Then there was a young boy from a house near the harbor, the one who had been so afraid of storms that he hid under his bed each time thunder rolled across the water. His mother took him to visit Jasper. Within minutes, the boy was running his fingers through Jasper's gray fur, steadying his breath in the rhythm of the dog's gentle sighs. And when thunder cracked that afternoon, the boy didn't hide. He held Jasper's paw instead. People noticed. People talked. And soon, quietly and naturally, Jasper became more than Olivia's protector. He became everyone's comfort. I saw it unfold day after day. Families would stop their errands just to kneel beside him. Children would bring him drawings. Seniors from the community center would ask if he could visit on Thursday afternoons, claiming they felt lighter just being near him. Jasper didn't seem to seek attention. He simply offered it, the way only an old soul can. His calm presence had a way of softening hardships, of drawing people out of their loneliness. And as someone who had spent decades watching grief shape and reshape the lives in this town, I knew this was more than coincidence. Some dogs carry a kind of healing in them, the kind born from their own scars. Jasper had survived abandonment, injury, fear, and heartbreak. He understood struggle in a way no one could teach. That understanding became his gift, So it was no surprise when the town council approached Olivia with an idea. Not formal, not official, just a shared hope. Would you be willing, they asked gently, to let Jasper visit the community center once a week? People seemed to find comfort in him. Olivia smiled, a small, grateful smile that reached her eyes in a way I had not seen since before the wedding. If Jasper wants it, she said softly, he can go anywhere he is needed. And Jasper wanted it. That was clear the first day I walked him into the center myself. The moment he entered the room, conversations paused, faces brightened, a weight lifted from shoulders bent with age and sorrow. Jasper walked from person to person, offering himself without hesitation. He laid his head on laps, pressed his nose into waiting hands, sat quietly at the feet of those who could not speak but still needed to be seen. And in return, the town gave him all the affection his old heart could hold. He became our unofficial therapy dog, not through training, not through ceremony, but through love, through instinct, through a presence that reminded us that healing often arrives on four legs and a warm breath. Even I found comfort in him. On evenings when the station felt too quiet or memories weighed heavy, I'd stop by Olivia's porch. Jasper would greet me with a soft tail wag and lean against my leg with that familiar steadiness that made me feel, just for a moment, like the world was a little kinder than I remembered. People ask me often, do you think Jasper knows what he's doing? Do you think he understands the peace he brings into a room? And every time I gave him the same answer. I do not think he understands it. I said, I think he is it. Because some hearts do not need instruction to love. Some spirits do not need training to heal. And some dogs, like Jasper, carry a gentleness that feels like a warm lantern held up in a darkened world. He had saved Olivia. But in the quiet weeks that followed, he saved all of us, too. One soft nudge, one steady breath, one loyal moment at a time. As Jasper settled into his new role as the quiet healer of our town, I found myself thinking back on everything that had happened. Not just the wedding that never came to be, or the truth that surfaced in the harsh glow of a stained glass morning, but the deeper thread woven through it all. A thread that belonged to loyalty, instinct, and the kind of love that never asked for anything in return. Standing on my porch one evening, watching the last orange light settle across the tops of pines, I felt the story settling inside me the way old memories do, slowly, gently, with the weight of something that deserves to be remembered. The breeze off the ocean carried a faint scent of salt, and for a moment, time felt as still as a paw's breath. In all my years as sheriff, decades spent responding to calls, comforting families, untangling truths people were afraid to face, I learned that danger often arrives quietly, but so does protection. And sometimes protection comes in forms we overlook. A soft nudge, a restless stare, a dog refusing to move from the doorway. Signals small enough to miss unless the heart knows how to listen. Jasper listened. That was his gift. And when I think about the arc of this story, from the day Olivia pulled him from the cold water to the day he stood between her and a life built on secrets, I realized something that years of training and experience never taught me. Sometimes the bravest heroes do not wear uniforms. Sometimes they do not speak. Sometimes they limp a little when they walk, or carry scars only visible in the quiet moments. But they stand firm, they protect, and they love with a steadiness that humbles the rest of us. I remember watching Olivia that week, her shoulders still tired from grief, yet her steps slowly returning strength. And beside her, always beside her, Jasper walked like a guardian who needed no orders. It struck me then that healing is rarely loud. It is not quick. It does not arrive with fanfare or applause. Healing is the quiet rebuilding of a heart that has been cracked but not destroyed. And in that rebuilding, there is often someone human or animal who holds the light steady until we can hold it ourselves. People in town often ask me now, Sheriff, what do you think this story means? Why did everything happen the way it did? I never rush my answer. I tell them the truth in the only way I know how. It means that life gives warnings, even when we do not want to hear them. It means that love and instinct speak the same language, even if we pretend not to understand. And it means that loyalty, real loyalty, is a kind of grace we do not earn. We are simply lucky when it finds us. I paused then, letting them feel the weight of the words before adding softly. And sometimes, the one who saves us is the one we thought we were saving. As the sun dipped lower that evening, casting long shadows that stretched across the quiet road, I closed my eyes and breathed in the scent of pine and sea. I thought of Jasper's steady eyes, Olivia's quiet courage, and the way truth had unfolded at the exact moment it needed to. Then, in that stillness, I understood the heart of it all. This story was never about a broken wedding. It was about a love pure enough to reveal what was hidden. It was about a bond stronger than fear. It was about a second chance, not just for Olivia, but for everyone who watched her rise from heartbreak with grace. And as I opened my eyes again to the fading light, I whispered to myself something I have learned through years of mistakes, losses, and unexpected miracles. Sometimes the strongest families are the ones built by devotion, not blood. As I stood there in the fading evening light, letting the weight of Jasper and Olivia's journey settle into something quiet and meaningful, I realized that stories like theirs do not end with a single event. They leave behind echoes, lessons that guide anyone willing to pause long enough to hear them. And as someone who has spent a lifetime studying human nature from both the courtroom and the kitchen table, I can tell you this much. The truths revealed in this story are worth holding on to. The first lesson is simple, yet often forgotten. Instinct is a form of wisdom. It speaks softly, long before reason catches up. Jasper felt unease when no one else did. He sensed danger wrapped in charm, and he tried with every fiber of his being to steer Olivia away from the edge she could not see. Most people dismiss instinct as fear or hesitation, but I have come to believe the opposite. Instinct is memory, ancient, deep, quiet memory, warning us of patterns we cannot yet name. And when someone, human or animal, insists that something is wrong, we owe it to ourselves to listen with more than just our ears. We must listen with our hearts. The second lesson is heavier. The truth will always surface, even if it arrives in a form we did not expect. In my years as sheriff, I saw how lies unravel, sometimes slowly, thread by thread, sometimes in a sudden blinding moment, like sunlight breaking through a storm. Daniel's truth surfaced because it had no other choice. That small object in his pocket, the one that Jasper revealed, carried the weight of who he truly was. You can hide a secret for a while. You can hide it from neighbors, from friends, even from someone you claim to love. But you cannot hide it forever from a heart that is paying attention. And Jasper paid attention in a way none of us did. He did not unmask Daniel out of anger. He did it to protect the woman who had once protected him. That is the purest form of truth there is, the kind revealed by devotion, not judgment. The third lesson, perhaps the most important, is this: love comes in many shapes, and the strongest of them are built on loyalty, not perfection. Olivia thought she needed a partner to rebuild her life, but what she needed was honesty, safety, tenderness. The quiet kind of love that shows up day after day without being asked. She found that in Jasper long before she ever realized it. A loyal dog may not bring roses or whisper promises under candlelight or stand in a tailored suit at the altar, but loyalty, real loyalty, is more powerful than any romance shaped by human hands. Loyalty protects. It sees without being told. It stays when others walk away. It is a kind of love that does not try to impress. It simply exists, steady and unshakable. And the final lesson is one I have learned over and over again as the years have carved lines into my face. Starting over is not a failure. It is a gift. It means you survived something that could have broken you. It means life is giving you a second chance to choose better, to see clearer, to trust deeper. Olivia did not lose a future. She escaped a future that was never meant to keep her safe. And Jasper, in his quiet, steadfast courage, gave her the freedom to begin again with truth at her back instead of danger at her heels. When people ask me now why this story matters, why it reached the soul of our town the way it did, I tell them this. It matters because it reminds us of what love looks like when stripped of fear. It matters because it shows us we are never as alone as we think. And it matters because it proves that sometimes the ones who save us are not angels or heroes in uniforms, but loyal hearts with our legs and a devotion deeper than words. Those are the lessons Jasper left us. Lessons carved not into stone, but into the soft, resilient parts of the human spirit. As the lessons of this story settled into my heart, There was one final image that stayed with me. Clear as sunrise over the Maine coast, steady as a tide that never fails to return. It is the picture that rises in my mind whenever someone asks me what became of Olivia and Jasper, and why their story has lingered in this town long after the last whispers faded. It happened on a late autumn afternoon. The kind of day when the air turns crisp enough to remind you that winter is coming, yet gentle enough to let the leaves fall softly, as if they too are unwilling to let go. I was walking down the familiar road past Olivia's cottage, heading home with the slow steps of a man who no longer measures time in minutes, but in moments worth remembering. The sun was lowering behind the pines, casting a warm golden wash across the houses. And there, at the end of the little stone path leading to her porch, I saw them. Olivia sat on the top step, a blanket wrapped loosely around her shoulders, her hair catching the fading light like strands of copper. Beside her, pressed close and comfortable, Jasper rested his head on her knee. His breathing was slow, peaceful, the kind of peaceful that only comes when a soul has done more good in this world than harm. She lifted her hand and stroked the fur along his neck, not with urgency or grief, but with gratitude. A soft, quiet gratitude born from walking through darkness and finding a loyal companion waiting at every turn. Neither of them spoke. They did not need to. The silence between them was not empty. It was full, filled with understanding, memory, and a bond that had survived more truth than most hearts are asked to face. From where I stood, just outside the gate, they looked like a portrait of what love becomes after it has been tested. Not loud, not perfect, but steady, honest, whole. And for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath around them. The wind moved gently through the trees. The last light of day settled across Jasper's silvering fur, and Olivia rested her cheek against the top of his head, closing her eyes in a peace she had earned, not given, not borrowed, but earned. If you were to ask me what the final image of the story truly is, I would tell you this. It is not a torn wedding veil. It is not a man slipping out the back door of a church. It is not even the triumphant moment when Jasper revealed the truth. The final image is a woman and her dog sitting together at the end of a long day, letting the quiet heal what the world once tried to break. It is a kind of moment that reminds you that love, in its purest form, does not shout. It endures. It protects. It stays. And as I turned away that evening, letting them keep their peace, I felt a warmth settle in my chest. Not the warmth of certainty, because life never offers that, but the warmth of knowing that two souls, one human, one canine, had found their way home again. A home not built from bricks or promises, but from loyalty and truth. And that, I suppose, is the image worth carrying into whatever comes next. And standing there on that quiet road, watching Olivia and Jasper framed in the soft glow of a dying day, I realized something else. Something meant not just for them, but for anyone who hears this story. Every one of us carries our own scars. Every one of us has lived through moments that shattered the path we thought we were meant to walk. And every one of us, at some point, has needed a light to guide us back home. Maybe that light came from a friend. Maybe it came from a stranger. Maybe it came from a dog who refused to leave your side. Wherever it came from, it mattered. It still does. And as this story draws to a close, I want to turn toward you, the person listening, the person who stayed with me through every twist, every truth, every quiet moment of healing. I want to invite you to reflect on your own journey. Think about the loyal hearts in your life, the ones who showed up when the world felt heavy, the ones who kept you grounded when fear tried to pull you away from yourself. These stories are not just tales to pass the time. They are reminders of what matters most. They show us that even in the darkest chapters, there is love waiting to steady us. They remind us that no one walks alone unless they choose to. So if the story touched something in you, if it brought back a memory, softened a hurt, or reminded you of a loyal companion you once loved, I invite you to stay with us. Share your thoughts. Share your memories. Tell us about the dog who changed your life, or the moment when instinct saved you from a truth you were not ready to see. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories about courage, loyalty, healing, and the quiet heroes who walk beside us, consider joining this community. You can subscribe, you can leave a comment, you can become part of the circle of people who believe in the goodness that still exists in this world. Because at the end of the day, that is what Hero Paw is all about. Not just dogs, not just rescues, but the bond that makes us human, the devotion that lifts us back to our feet, the truth that sometimes the greatest love in life is the one that does not need words at all. So take a breath with me. Let this story settle where it needs to settle. And if your heart felt even the smallest spark of recognition, I hope you'll stay for the next story. Because somewhere out there, another loyal soul is waiting to remind us that love, in its purest form, never truly leaves. Thank you for listening. Thank you for feeling. And thank you for believing in the quiet miracles that walk on four legs.